Hey guys, my name is Judy Cho, and I'm also known as Nutrition with Judy. And my practice focuses on a carnivore cures meat only elimination diet to get to root cause healing. The thing is, oftentimes our clients have to also eat high fat to be in a ketogenic state of carnivore. And this is why I love the carnivore bar because one, they recommend eating meat, but not only that, these carnivore bars are actually very shelf stable and they're high fat. So it's a therapeutic version of carnivore. And this has really helped me when I'm on the go. It's a quick bite and I could honestly have two and make it a full meal. There's sufficient protein and there's high quality fats that you will stay in a ketogenic state. I love that this bar, it's different. So you can think of it as a non-sugary version of a crunch bar, but there's a bit of a bite. Some of my clients love it as an after meal snack where it has a little bit of savory, it's salty, there's a little bit of crunch, but it's actually very tasty if you get used to not expecting it to be sweet. That would be my biggest recommendation, but perfect snack. I'm really grateful for this product because for me personally, I love that it's high fat, I love that it's on the go, and I love that it does not skimp on quality. So make sure to check out Carnivore Bar. It's an amazing product. And thank you, Carnivore Bar, for making carnivore just a little bit easier for the community and my clients. Hey guys, it's Judy from Nutrition with Judy. And thanks for joining me today. While you're here, please make sure to like and subscribe. Hit the red button. If you're listening to this on podcast, please make sure to leave a review as this allows my content to get in front of more people. And thank you for that. My name is Judy Cho and I'm board certified in holistic nutrition. I have a private practice where we focus on root cause healing, and oftentimes it starts with the carnivore cures meat only elimination diet. So today I had the pleasure of sitting down with Joel Salatin. He is the face of the Polyface Farms. Most of you probably already have heard of him or know of him, but it was such a wonderful discussion. And I really didn't interrupt him so that he can just share his thoughts and share his wisdom with so much of what will help our climate, our planet, our people, the animals. And it's just a lot of information to really take in. And you may have to listen to this twice, but it's a lot of good information to really think about what we're doing with all this new science, all this new stuff that when we mess with nature, how does that impact us in the long term? Joel Salatin is an American farmer, lecturer, and author. The Salatin family raises livestock on his Polyface Farm in Swoope, Virginia, and he considers himself a Christian libertarian, environmentalist, capitalist, lunatic farmer. When Joel explains a lot about regenerative agriculture and just healing the lands by letting nature run its course, it's really powerful. And I hope that when you listen or watch this conversation, it really hits home as to why meat-based is not a diet that's wrong for us or not meant for us, but why it's actually ideal. And even the proper treatment of animals so that it heals our soils. And a lot of these things are so important. You'll learn a lot more about cows, carbon, and climate, and why that even matters, and how monocropping is actually impacting our planet in an adverse way. Let's get right into the conversation. Hi, Joel. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm very excited. As I just told you offline, that I quoted you in my Carnivore Cure book. So I'm super excited for people listening and watching to learn more about you. If you can just introduce yourself.
Sure. So thank you. It's great to be with you. It's a real honor and a delight. I'm Joel Salatin, and our family owns Polyface Farm here in Virginia, Shenandoah Valley. My parents bought this property in 1961, so I was just 4 years old. Grew up here and came back to the farm after college. And my dad was a innovative ecologist, economist, and did a lot of interesting experiments. And he never made a living from the farm. He was an accountant. My mom was a girls' health and phys ed school teacher before Title IX, and then of course had both of them after Title IX. And so, the off-farm jobs paid for the farm, paid for the mortgage. And so by the time I was a late teen, here we had this land and, not a salary. Anyway, I took a love to it, came back full-time September 24, 1982, after a brief stint at the local newspaper where I was an investigative reporter and did the farming and working in town deal for a couple of years. And So here we are. We're in livestock. We're in grass. We're in pastured livestock: beef, pork, chicken, eggs, duck, lamb, rabbit. I think I got them all, and of course, and forestry projects as well. We have a lot of woods. We have a sawmill, so we do a lot of lumber as well.
And what would you say is really different from Polyface farms versus like the conventional farms that you see?
Oh, well, there are a lot of difference. For one thing, we don't buy any chemical fertilizer. So the fact that the Russian and Ukraine thing that's increased the fertilizer cost, that doesn't affect us at all. What we do use, though, is we use carbon. We run a carbon economy. So we're doing large scale composting with pigs, by the way, not with big machines. And so the first order I say would be no chemical fertilizers and composting. Second, I would say is just the variety of animals that we have, just all of the different kinds of animals that we have. And then they move all the time. They're not confined in factory houses. They're on pasture. They're at high density and moved daily or almost daily to fresh paddocks, fresh spots. So there's this complete animal ballet or choreography going on. And so it's pasture based with moved animals. And then, of course, another big one is that we're very people centric. So we direct market everything. We don't sell it at the grain elevator or the auction house or the big processor. We direct market everything to neighbors and people in the area, as well as now, since 2019, we now ship nationwide as well. So between the carbon, the organic matter, the animals, the diversity of animals, the relationships of the animals, and the direct marketing, we're definitely on the lunatic fringe.
And I love it. And if you can just maybe break it down for us as to why that even matters with carbon, with regenerative agriculture, like why does it matter that these animals are with different animals and that they're doing this fine dance? Like, why does that matter?
Sure. Well, it matters because carbon in the soil, I mean, the organic matter, and I'm being a layman here. I'm not being a scientist, but that's close enough for what we need to talk about. The organic matter in the soil is what ultimately feeds the biology of the soil. The soil is a living thing. And if you take an orange and you think about how deep the orange is, the color on the skin, if the orange were the earth, that coloring is how deep the soil is. That's what's between us and starvation. And so it's pretty important what happens to that little thin skin on the earth, because that's what we all depend on for food. And that's what has the earthworms and the actinomycetes and the mycorrhizae and all the things that are required to grow nutrient dense foods. Without them, you can kind of artificially make things happen, but it's not nutritional. You can make an egg in a factory house,
Sure,
but you can't make a nutritious egg in a factory house. And we have empirical data. There's plenty of studies that have showed the differences in the nutrient density, pasture-based meats versus confinement-based things. And so essentially, we have to understand, if I back up a little bit, we have to understand that 500 years ago, North America produced way more food than it does today. And so in a time of food uncertainty and where people are being concerned about food security, I think it's important for us to appreciate that if more food was produced 500 years ago, it behooves all of us to think about, well, how was all that food produced? Now, it wasn't all consumed by humans. We had 200 million beavers that ate more vegetables than all the humans on North America today. We had 2 million wolves that each needed 20 pounds of meat a day. And we had flocks of passenger pigeons that were so big and dense they blocked out the sun for 3 days, according to the naturalist Audubon. So it wasn't all consumed by humans, but it was produced nonetheless. And so what you see when you start into an examination of the patterns that produced all of this, and this was not just in North America, it was in Australia, it was in New Zealand, it was in Europe, it was in Eurasia, it was everywhere, this tremendous production. What you see is extremely complex interrelationships within the plant animal community. You don't see segregation, right. You see integration. And so you don't see separation, you see symbiosis. And so our entire industrial food and farming system is now predicated on a mechanical view of biology, or of life, let's say, a mechanical view of life rather than a biological view of life. It's a mechanical view, and it's all predicated on separating and division rather than putting things together. And of course, as you know, in the field of nutrition, we have compartmentalized nutrients, this and this and this, and we think we can just synthesize them in a laboratory and it's all good. But we also know that how they come together in a natural product, a T-bone steak, whatever, when you have all of those together, you have a totally different thing than if you just fabricate artificials and try to duplicate that artificially.
And so there's a lot of the monocropping, as they say, in terms
Yes.
of the whole conventional farming where they just raise corn over and over. And you talk about how that's so not ideal for the planet, and how doing what Polyface Farms does is actually beneficial for the planet. So can you talk a little bit about why monocropping, doing the soy,
Sure.
wheat, corn is not ideal? And
Sure. Yeah, well, we can even back up a little bit and talk about annuals versus perennials. I think that'd be a good starting point to have this discussion, because nature actually, while there are annuals, so make sure we don't lose anybody here. Annuals are plants that live for 1 year, make a seed, and then have to be replanted next year. Perennials are plants that live beyond 1 year. So the grasses, the prairie grasses and things, those are perennials. Trees are perennials. They don't have to be replanted every year. Whereas corn, soybeans, barley, wheat, squash, watermelons, those are annuals, and they have to be planted every year. And so the critical thing to understand from an ecological energy standpoint is that perennials pull solar energy. It's all chlorophyll, photosynthesis. It takes solar energy, pulls it down into the soil and puts its energy in the soil, because the perennial can't depend on a seed to keep it going. It needs to withstand a drought, a blizzard, a hot, a cold, and it depends on under the ground. So it puts its bank account, if you will, its energy savings account under the ground. Whereas an annual depends on above ground propagation. So it makes a big seed, a big grain, a big fruit, a big something above ground. And so it tends to be energy extractive of the soil and putting all this energy above ground. The perennial is the opposite. It takes this energy and puts it into the soil. And so, when people say, well, cows are inefficient, of course they're inefficient. If everything was as efficient as watermelon and squash, we would not have any soil. And that's why even in organic, non-chemical, production schemes, gardens and things, they still depend on the addition of animal-based compost to keep the soil fertile, because there is no animal-less ecology. All ecologies have animals. Why? It's because animals are this great recycler. The animal is the ultimate compost pile. If you build a compost pile, it's a little bit technical, if it gets too dry or too wet, or you don't have enough carbon, or you've got too much nitrogen, or whatever, there's a whole, recipe here for making a good thing of carbon. But when a cow, for example, ingests carbon, like weeds and leaves and things like that, it goes into her insides, and guess what? They're always the right temperature. They're always the right microbes. They're always the right moisture. And so the animal can do to biomass, it can recycle biomass way more efficiently and with less risk than biomass recycled with, a compost pile, or just with, over time with decomposition. And so think about an animal as a very rapid decomposition, item. And it helps us to appreciate the role of animals on the planet. They serve, especially the herbivores, serve a tremendous advantage. And that's why the world is so full of herbivores, because these perennials, they grow very rapidly, but they go into senescence rapidly. A grass plant may in 60 days go from germination to seed and senescence in 60 days. So they need to be pruned back to restart the rapid solar conversion process. And the pruner is the herbivore. That's the ultimate pruner. And so that's how this works. So monocropping, when you take away the perennial and you go to an annual monocrop year after year after year, what you do over time is you deplete the soil. In fact, right now, I think the general rule is every bushel of corn costs us 2 bushels of soil. And now, we have a dead zone the size of Rhode Island in the Gulf of Mexico from silt erosion, runoff, and turbidity that's created by the soil degradation in the entire Mississippi drainage area. So, this is a big deal. And so nature doesn't have monocrops. Nature moves toward diversity.
Right.
And so, do I use some corn? Yes, we do. But we should use as little of it as possible, not as much of it as possible.
So the dead zone, for example, if we were to put a lot of animals over there, could we bring back the soil one day?
Oh, absolutely. If we converted that entire, Mississippi drainage area, if we converted that back to prairie, which it was, 500 years ago, not only would it be way more productive, it would actually build soil and create legacy soil for the future. The monocrops that we're still producing in the Midwest are still exploiting the buildup of organic matter that came from the prairie grasses, the bison and the wolves and the pheasants and the elk and the deer and the prairie chickens and the passenger pigeons. We're still leveraging that wealth today.
So, there's a lot of thoughts with, well, the animals, especially the cows, are ruining the planet with the greenhouse gases, with the burping methane. What are your thoughts with that? I mean, we just obviously talked about your farm, but what are your thoughts with that?
Sure. Well, first of all, the entire greenhouse gas theory is missing the boat. GHGs only account for about 5% of climate temperature fluctuation. 95% is water condensation. And the problem is that we don't have now the vegetation through tillage, through overgrazing. We now don't have the vegetation creating the bacteria that exudes up from vegetation, from foliage, to give particles for water vapor to condense on. Basically, water vapor is the Earth's radiator. So greenhouse gases are only 5% of the entire, cooling, the whole cyclical cooling pattern. 95% is water vapor. And so we have, expanding desertification. We have enormous dust storms, which are an anti-condensation particulate. And this is why over the tropics, the jungles, you get cloud formation routinely because of all that foliage exuding this bacteria. So what we need is far more vegetation. Well, how do you get more vegetation? Well, first of all, you reduce plowing and denuding the soil. The second is overgrazing. So here's the deal, Judy. Let's say that you and I lived on Pluto and we looked down at the Earth and we said, I wonder what kind of education system they have down there. Could we get a volunteer to go down and check out their education system? So, you and I volunteer, we get in a flying saucer, we come down to the Earth and we land in the schoolyard of a school district that has the worst superintendent, in a school that has the worst principal, and we go visit a classroom that has the worst teacher and the worst kids. And we watch this for 2 days. When we go back to Pluto, they say, well, what did you learn? And you know what we'd say? We'd say, well, my goodness, if that's the way education works, they'd be better not to have any schools. And that's exactly what's happened with this whole burping, cow methane deal, is that the studies have been on the current orthodoxy. Well, the orthodoxy right now, the conventional production system, couldn't be more dysfunctional. In nature, herbivores exhibit three basic characteristics. Number one, they're moving. They don't stay in the same place. Number two, they're mobbed up for predator protection. They're not spread all out. Number three, they're mowing. They're not eating corn. They're not eating chicken manure. They're mowing or pruning. Okay. So moving, mobbing, mowing. 98%, maybe 99% of all of the domestic livestock in the world does not do moving, mobbing, and mowing. If you violate one of those three, you move asset to liability. You move positive to negative. You move regeneration and function to dysfunction. And I would say most domestic livestock doesn't just violate one of those principles, it violates all three of them. Think about a beef feedlot. They're not moving. I guess they are mobbed up, but they're not mobbed up. They're not mobbing across the landscape. They're simply standing in their own toilet, and they certainly aren't pruning anything. They aren't mowing anything. And so, that's a violation of all three of these principles. And so you can do the same thing with chickens or whatever. There's a role for animals, but we have taken them out of their historic pattern, out of their role, and that moves them from positive function to negative dysfunction. And that's what is being studied, because that's what's conventional right now. And scientists tend to study what's normal, and what's normal now is very dysfunctional.
Right. But even within the animals, it seems like it's a small percentage of the entire climate heating. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. I mean, what is it? 85% of the methane is produced in wetlands. Here's another element. There is methanotrophic bacteria in pasture. In healthy pasture has methanotrophic bacteria. This is a freestanding bacteria. Okay. In healthy pastures, that methanotrophic bacteria reaches out, grabs, and metabolizes the amount of methane that would be produced by 1,000 cows per acre. Well, nobody's going to put 1,000 cows per acre on a pasture. All right. But that methanotrophic bacteria does not live in a feedlot. It does not live in a confinement situation. It does not live on concrete. It does not live in manure lagoons. It does not live in cornfields and monocrops. It lives in diversified, healthy pastures. And so nature has answers for every single issue. In fact, in nature, the cow burp is pulled by methanotrophic bacteria, pulled into the soil as a fertilizer. Okay. But when you break that and you don't have healthy pasture and you overgraze, or you confine them in a feedlot, when you violate moving, mobbing, and mowing in any respect, suddenly the methanotrophic bacteria cannot operate. It does not work. And so all of these natural safeties that are built in creation, when they're violated, they can't work. Just like anything, when you quit telling your spouse you love them, it doesn't work. Right? When you eat junk, it doesn't work. When you hate your neighbor, it doesn't work. So for me, it's so simple to see how this is supposed to work. So our studies and our scientific journals and our Lancet articles and our Impossible Burger and Beyond Meat and Bill Gates and the whole deal is all predicated on a completely broken, dysfunctional production model.
Agreed. And then what about your thoughts with the water? So that's another argument that a lot of people say is, well, the cows, even if they weren't ruining everything with the greenhouse gases, they completely take a lot of water. But obviously there's differences with blue, green, and gray. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, let's drill down on that a bit. Yeah, the studies that say, a T-bone steak takes whatever, 1,000 gallons of water. I mean, I don't know the statistics right off my head, but it's a complete sham. Think about this. A cow urinates 5 gallons a day. That's a lot of water. Okay. Now I realize it's not water. Don't miss. I'm fair enough to know that urine is not water, but it's primarily water. Okay. So the water that the animal intakes, it excretes almost all of it. Very little is actually metabolized into the animal. It's just like the water that we drink. Most of it is excreted. Some of it's used, most of it's excreted. Furthermore, if the cow is handled correctly with healthy pasture, there is no quicker way or more risk-free way to build organic matter in the soil than with perennial forages. Okay. And then if you add compost to it and you do that, then of course you can build it even more. So I'll just give you on our farm, for example, in 1961, when we came here, the first soil samples that we took, our farm averaged less than 1% organic matter. Okay, less than 1%. Today, we average more than 8% organic matter. Now, every 1% organic matter in the soil. So organic matter is like spongy. It's like little, it's organic matter is like little leaves and sticks and decomposing carbon material. So it's the sponginess of the soil. In organic matter, every 1% organic matter in the soil holds, are you ready for this? Every 1% holds 20,000 gallons of water per acre. All right. So on our farm, we have gone from 1% to more than 8. Let's just say 1 to 8. That is 7 clicks, 7 percentages. 7 times 20,000 is 140,000 gallons. That's 140,000 gallons of water per acre that our farm can now hold today that it couldn't hold in 1961. And that is a direct result of building organic matter, through the perennial, it's the same way that all soils have been built. If you go throughout the planet and say, where are the good soils? They're never under forests and they're not under bushes. They're under prairies. Right. Whether it's the American Midwest here in the Shenandoah Valley here, or you go to the Pampas of Argentina, you go to the Serengeti in Africa, you go to the steppes of outer Mongolia. All of these deep soiled areas were all built with perennial grasses and megafauna. Megafauna being everything from deer to mastodons and elephants. So that relationship, we know that's how soil is built, because grasses are way more efficient at solar energy into carbon, at carbon sequestration, than trees. Now it's counterintuitive. I understand. You look at a forest and say, well, look at all that carbon, but that's 80 years of accumulated carbon. Sure. If you go out on your lawn and you took a square yard and you every time you mowed, you kept the grass off of that, you put it in a bag and you put it in an outbuilding, and you did that for 80 years. And at 80 years, you went out and said, here's the biomass, the carbon that was produced on this square yard. You would realize very quickly, oh, wow, that's more than the forest. And so that's why these deep soils were always built under grasses with the pruning herbivore going across them. Remember, moving, mobbing, and mowing. And if they violate any of those, it's not good farming. And in North America, of course, most farmers don't move their animals. They put them out on a pasture and they leave them there year round, and they collect whatever grows in the fall, and they overgraze, overeat, they kill the good stuff, let the weeds grow, and spray the weeds. And they do this every year. And it's a degenerating trajectory rather than a regenerating trajectory.
Based on everything you're saying, it seems so simple, the answer, whether it's for climate, whether it's for the betterment of the animals and their treatment, and even just our land. Why aren't we just shifting back to that?
Well, there are a couple of reasons. The quick answer is that what I'm describing takes a tremendous amount of thinking, and thinking is the hardest work we do. It's a lot easier to just go out and run a machine than to think about whether we should run a machine. I don't want to be trite, but yes, a lot of it is this whole, it does take a lot more care, a lot more planning and thinking. And of course, you and I know that making a decision is the hardest thing a human has to do, right? Is making a decision. We'd rather do anything than make a decision. So decision making is difficult. And so what we do, we're not farming based on the advice of a salesman or some expert or some computer printout. We're doing it based on daily observation, monitoring, auditing, our own record keeping, It's truly a choreography in the pasture. That's one. So the second one is that the orthodox, the conventional, system is completely enamored of a mechanical paradigm. If you separate East from West, okay, Eastern is all about holism, connections. We're all related. It's real feely oriented. Eastern thought would not have given us electricity. It would have simply still been awed at lightning. Okay. Western, which is, Greco-Roman Western reductionist, systematic, compartmentalized thinking, gives us mechanics. It gives us engineering, mechanics, and how does this, parts and pieces, and that's mechanical. Well, life has both elements. Yes, it does have parts and pieces and mechanics, but it also has this mysterious, how does it go together? You can't just fabricate a baby. You can't just fabricate an oak tree. There is something way beyond just a part. And so in our Western thinking, where we're products of the kind of the Greco-Roman, Western reductionist thought, as Westerners, and I speak for myself, I feel like my whole life, what I've had to wrestle with is I've had to pour Easternism on my Westernism. I'm from that, that Western DNA, if you will, but I recognize now how much of that does not explain very important things in life. It does not explain it. It certainly doesn't explain love. Okay. It doesn't explain ethics. It doesn't. And so, for example, when we say that it does matter whether we honor the pigness of the pig, for example, whether our pigs are happy or not, the average farm doesn't care if his pigs are happy. I mean, when's the last time you saw a land-grant university do a study on how to make happy pigs? No, it's viewing pigs as just protoplasmic stuff. And how do we make them grow faster, fatter, bigger, cheaper? In fact, how do we extract the DNA, the stress DNA from their genetic material so we can abuse them and confine them and disrespect them more, but they won't be stressed about it? Ultimately, a culture that refuses to ask, how do we make happy pigs, will refuse to ask, how do we make a happy Judy or a happy Tom? It won't ask, because it is that question that creates the ethical boundary over what our science is capable of doing. We're very smart. We're very smart as humans, and we can create things that we can't spiritually, physically, or ethically, or spiritually metabolize. And so what happens is we overrun our headlights. I mean, a perfect example is, 40 years ago, when the experts all told farmers like me, they took us to free steak dinners and said, here's the new scientific way to grow cows. We're gonna grind up cows and cook them down and feed dead cows to cows. And, I looked at that and said, whoa, wait a minute. I'm not sure about this. In fact, I'm sure I don't like it, and I looked around the world and I said, where does an herbivore eat carrion? Where is it? And I couldn't see it. Herbivores eat grass, they eat plants. They don't eat carrion. They don't eat meat. And so farmers like me did not buy into that. Now, we didn't know that 20 or 30 years later, there would be bovine spongiform encephalopathy, also known as mad cow. We didn't know that, but we knew that template violated a clear order, a clear creation order that was set up. And so we didn't know what would be the consequences. But when you come to this humbly, respectfully, you step into the majesty and the mystery of life gently. You don't step into it like a swashbuckling sailor saying, I'm going to go, claim this DNA for me and file a patent. And that's what we've got now is we've got this kind of conquistador mentality. It's all in my domain. There is no divine, there is no providence. And I can just wade in here, buy it, take it, trade it, sell it, remodel it, however I want to. And there's no ethical, moral framework on which to hang anything. There is no absolute truth. There is no ethical framework. There is no actual morality. And when you head down that path, what you have then, you have incredible cheating. You have you have cheating and shortcutting within the system. And then you get a dead zone the size of the Rhode Island in the Gulf of Mexico. You get three-legged salamanders, infertile frogs, eagle eggs that won't hatch. You get non-Hodgkin's lymphoma from glyphosate. You get, I can go on. You get food allergies. Until I was 30 years old, the phrase food allergy did not even exist. Wow. It did not even exist. You could have a birthday party for your kiddos and you didn't have to call all the other moms and say, hey, we're going to serve this refreshment. Is that okay with you? No, everybody came and you enjoyed the food. And so as we have abused and disrespected our food, from tomato plants to piggies, as we have fought violently against nature's template in food and farming and landscape management, guess what? Nature has a balance sheet, and nature's going to balance that out with things like food allergy, MRSA, C. diff, Campylobacter, E. coli, Salmonella. These are all a lexicon that have come in very recent years, and they didn't use to, and then type 2 diabetes and all sorts of issues that have come as a result. You cannot fight against God's design in nature. It's very forgiving. It's amazing how forgiving it is. It'll take a lot of blows, just like a person can take a lot of abuse and still come out but eventually it's not going to work. And that's what we're seeing.
And I struggle with that all the time, because being in the evidence-based research, you see all the ways that humans use all this new science and research to then pick out DNAs or pick out certain things. And we're, like you said, we're almost adulterating the way natural life's supposed to be. And I almost, when you were comparing Eastern, Western, I thought of, we are refining things and all about efficiency and effectiveness, but taking out some of the soul of a lot of that, which we don't understand. And we can't really define that by science. And then the aftermath of it all is, now we're going down these paths of, well, let's grow lab-grown meat or lab-grown dairy, and it's perfectly the same because we pulled the DNA. And my concern with all of that is, and even with the lab-grown meats, and it's, how do we know it's exactly the same? And my gut is that it won't be. And then when people have autoimmune or that are struggling and the only thing they can tolerate is meat, and now we're starting to grow them in these labs, how do we know that now we're removing any options for these people? And it makes me incredibly sad.
It is certainly not the same. If I may just indulge you one little picture. So imagine a monocrop of corn or soybeans. It's going to go into as the feed source for a lab-grown meat. All right. Compare that simple item to a steer, a beef animal that is grazing on a cornucopia of diversified forages. There are plants that love heat, plants that love cold, plants that make tap roots, plants that make spreader roots, plants that like shade, plants that like direct sun, and herbs and forbs and weeds and grasses and legumes. Every one of these concentrates a different group of minerals, vitamins, enzymes, all of these things. And so you get that complexity in the tissue of the animal. It's one of the fastest ways right now that Americans can diversify their microbiome. The Native Americans ate something like 2,000 different kinds of things. Modern Americans, we only eat about 25 or 30 different kinds of things. Mainly we eat about 15. And so one of the fastest ways to diversify your microbiome is to get meat, eggs, poultry from animals that have been on a diversified pasture platform, if you will, that gives the diversity into the tissue. You are not going to get that from fake lab meat. It's all going to be simplified. It's not going to be nearly that nuanced. And I mean, even the fact that the saliva of, listen to this, the saliva of the cow, when she nips off a piece of grass, the saliva from her mouth acts as a salve. Those microbes, they help to close up the wound from where she ripped the grass off, and they stimulate the grass to grow better. Wow. There's a symbiotic relationship. that's why mowed grass, like from art, a mechanical mower, it never grows back as fast as grazed grass, because it doesn't have that ameliorative saliva dripping down from the cow. And there's now even research showing that even the breath, pigs in the, we run pigs through the woods, and the pigs are actually, as they snuffle along, they're sniffing in spores from molds, toadstools, fungi. And as they move around, they actually spread that fungi around through the woods and act as a relocator, as a disseminator of that diversity. And so it's just magnificent beyond explanation. And to think that we're just going to take some soybean and beets for blood, and we're going to just throw this together in a concoction. And let me say one more thing about that. When there are few things as that lend themselves to food tyranny as much as fake meats, because let's just take a cow or a sheep or a goat, as long as the sun shines and it rains and you have green material, you can have milk, you can have meat. That's all you need.
Right.
But if what you need is a $1 billion laboratory to synthesize your sustenance coming through a supermarket channel that you can't see and can't control, and has guard towers with no trespassing signs around it, that is the ultimate system that is conducive to a non-democratic access to sustenance. If there's one thing that needs to be egalitarian and democratically accessible, it is sustenance. And real food grown in your backyard, your own carrots, your own or your neighbors. But things, you and I can do this. You see, all you need is a spot of ground, and you can get beef, you can get pork, you can get an egg, you can get carrots and potatoes, and real food is ultimately grown with sun, soil, and air, and that's all you need. You don't need $1 billion laboratory and a delivery truck. And that is ultimately freeing and liberating for all of us.
And that really brings wellness for all. And I love that. It's also, I think there's been research about the Beyond Burgers and all those fake patties, where they actually cause more greenhouse gases from some of the stuff they emit in those labs. And it's just very labor and costly and a lot of other things. And then on top of that, price per pound for these meats are so incredibly high, but they've done such a great job marketing that it's better for the planet, better for the health of the person. And it's so unfortunate because you're paying more for toxic foods. And what are your thoughts with all of the plant-based people that are going vegan and vegetarian, and then like the hydroponics and all of these new, I mean, I know it kind of goes into what we've been talking about, but what are your thoughts with all this?
Yeah, well, my thoughts are, I think there are two things. There are kind of two threads that move people to this. One thread is ecology and health. I'm doing this to be ecologically proper, a good steward, and I want to take care of my body. So you've got the health of the person, health of the planet. That's one thread. The other thread is that animals are people.
Yes.
And my dog is my cat, is my aunt, is my, so you have this thing that, I mean, I've certainly been called a murderer many times by people, and I've even been told you can't possibly even express love because you kill all these things. And those are two very different things. To the one where it's murder, I would simply say everything is eating and being eaten. And if you don't believe it, go lie naked in your flower bed for 3 days and see what gets eaten. I mean, if the cycle of life, death, decomposition, regeneration, life, death, decomposition, regeneration, that is the cycle of, it's an object lesson of spiritual truth.
Right.
We live, we die to self, we decompose to our own self, and we're regenerated in I believe in Christ, but anyway, you have this cycle, and so nothing brings that out better than a compost pile, for example. You put this raw stuff in, it dies, it decays, then it grows the best cucumbers you've ever had, right? Because it regenerates and it feeds life. So everything is eating and being eaten. And we need to get over this idea that my cat is my aunt, is my dog, is my, child. And the fact that we're even spending time having this discussion is an indicator not of a newfound place of spiritual nirvana, but rather a profound disconnect with our dependency on an ecological umbilical that demands sacrifice in order for life to happen. Now, on the, I think we discussed the the planetary health fairly well. But the physical health again, the study, the things, and I know that science as we know it has been extremely adulterated. Studies, depends on who pays for the study and what they find. I mean, the China study is a perfect example of cherry picking, certain things. So I would simply ask to people, does it make sense that pre-1900, when there was essentially no cancer, no heart disease, virtually no obesity, certainly no diabetes, no autism, no autoimmune disease, does it make sense that the foods that were eaten before 1900, and that's a good, Michael Pollan writes about that. He says, basically we shouldn't eat anything that wasn't available before 1900. And does it make sense that all of these modern recent diseases have been caused because for the first time in our lives, we're eating things we can't pronounce. We're eating things made in a lab. We're eating things you can't make in your kitchen. We've got long ingredient lists instead of short ingredient lists. It's highly processed, not minimally processed. And no, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense that these diseases, that something about since 1900 and the industrialization of food and the manipulation of food, it doesn't make sense that our current health crisis has nothing to do with that kind of manipulation. That if we went back to unprocessed, compost grown, non-chemical food, we would probably eliminate most. It's just reasonable. It's just reasonable to think that. And of course, again, my joke about that is we can all be thankful that hot dogs were introduced at the 1890 World's Fair. So hot dogs just came in 10 years under the benchmark for what's okay. The nutrition of food is very different, as you know. Right. I mean, we participated several years ago in a pastured egg study where we sent our eggs out to a lab in Washington. There were 12 of us around the country with pastured eggs. We sent them out to a lab in Washington. And I'll just give you one ingredient, folic acid. Folic acid is really important for pregnant women. Right. And the USDA nutrition label on an egg carton, you buy it in the store, it'll say that an egg has 48 micrograms of folic acid in it. Our eggs here at Polyface tested 1,038 micrograms per egg. Wow. So we're not talking about little 10% deviations. Grass finished beef, 300% more riboflavin than grain finished beef. Conjugated linoleic acid, CLA. Right. It only takes about 14 days of grain feeding to chase all the CLA out of the body. So, there are major nutrition differences.
I think it just goes back to if we just let nature be and run its course, but it's with whether it's the great marketing and the fear mongering of cholesterol causing heart disease, and then all of us eating all these processed foods with all the long laundry list of ingredients that then cause us to have brain fog where we don't even think, because it's so logical and it makes so much sense when you just have a conversation of, you really think it's the cows that's been around since day one and but it's affecting our health. So it makes a lot of sense. But, as the economy is getting really shaky nowadays and people keep saying that we need to have a meat tax and stuff, how do you recommend that we afford meat being our primary food? How do we keep it economical?
Yeah, so there are several ways to make it economical. The first one is to realize that you make choices about what you buy.
Okay.
And so whenever somebody says, I can't afford your stuff, I say, here, let's go to your house. We're not going to find any soft drinks. We're not going to find tobacco. We're not going to find coffee. We're not going to find iPhones. We're not going to find junk food, takeout, DiGiorno's frozen pizza. Well, we're not going to, and you start down this list, and you realize, oh, wow, people really do have a lot of choice in what they buy. Second thing is buy unprocessed. Right now today, you can buy our chicken, our pastured chicken, GMO free, first class, less per pound than boneless, skinless breasts at Walmart. So when you buy unprocessed, you save a lot of money. And then the next thing is to buy in bulk. Don't buy pieces and parts, buy volume. We have a thing we call the larder. If you buy 10 chickens, you get a huge discount. Why? Because we're depositing a much bigger check. It's just easier. We're handling more money per transaction. Get a quarter beef. So get a chest freezer that you can buy bulk and go directly to the farmer, cut out that middleman. What's very interesting right now is that many of us in this space are seeing our prices relative to supermarket prices go down in comparison because we're not subject to Ukrainian wheat and Russian fertilizer. And so, and our smaller businesses, we don't have, the HR department concern about somebody getting COVID and suing us because we didn't have the right quarantine procedures over in, room 231 and those sorts of things. And so our little speedboats are able to navigate this new dysfunction a lot easier than the aircraft carriers of Cargill and Tyson and Purdue, some of the big, and Smithfield, some of the big outfits. And so there is Tyson just raised the price of their beef 32%.
Wow.
We've raised it 10%, and that's plenty. And so we're actually seeing some of our prices lower than what's in the supermarket for the first time in my life, because ultimately nature bats last. and biology beats out chemistry. Ultimately, sometimes it takes half a century for efficiency to give way to resiliency. Sometimes it takes a long time. There's a slinky effect. Eventually, truth comes out, and nature bats last.
It was interesting. I think of the best eggs being corn-free, soy-free fed chickens that are pasture raised and organic. And those are always the most expensive at the grocery store. But just the other day we went and it was only $1 difference for the dozen eggs of those versus the dozen that are no label, nothing. And I was shocked. So yes, I totally see that. As a shepherd of the land and of meeting so many different people that come to visit your farm and just the animals you've raised, like what are some great life lessons that you've learned along the way?
Oh, great life lessons. You mean just from farm or from the people who come?
Shepherd of the land, people that you've whatever comes to mind.
Well, life lessons, I would say there's several. One would certainly be good enough is perfect. A lot of times people are intimidated or scared to try something, whether it's a new recipe, a new product, a new something, a new idea. And, it doesn't have to be perfect for you to try it. Secondly, I would say if it's worth doing, it's worth doing poorly first. That's a kind of a corollary of that, but if it's worth doing, it's worth doing poorly first. We have this voice in our back of our heads, probably some grandma, if it's worth doing, it's worth doing right. Well, I've got news for you. Grandma was wrong. The truth is, if it's worth doing, it's worth doing poorly first. So what if your first attempt at cooking from scratch fails? It's okay. If it's worth doing, it's worth doing poorly first, because we don't do anything well first. I would say another big one is make little baby steps. Don't worry about speed, just worry about trajectory. Are you doing better today than yesterday? That's all that matters. You don't have to win the race tomorrow. Okay. Remember, the turtle won, the rabbit didn't. And so don't worry about speed, how fast you're getting there. Just worry about direction. Is the direction the right Is the direction the right way? People get frustrated. We live in such impatient times, don't we? Instant gratification. I want it tomorrow. I want to be there, whatever. And the truth is that the biological clock in the soil, in the landscape, in your body, your biological clock, you are the summation of perhaps even generations that have come before you. And you're not going to rectify that in a day. So you have to stay with it. You just have to stay with you, persevere. You're faithful in staying with it and making those little improvements, and celebrate those improvements, and don't get frustrated and impatient. It's incremental, make those changes, and you won't burn out on the way because you're frustrated at failure to accelerate. No, just be satisfied with trajectory, and that's enough.
I love that, because I see a lot of people eat like the standard American diet, then they learn about all these things and they say, starting tomorrow, I'm going to eat only regenerative agriculture, raw dairy, etc. And
Yeah.
it's just goes, this pendulum swings so much that it's susceptible to failure. And then they
Yes.
get frustrated and hard on themselves. And then they go swing back the other way.
Yeah,
So
it's too hard. It's too hard. So I'm a big believer in the 80-20 rule. The
Okay.
80-20 rule. Okay. So do 80% with intention, and 20% gives you the fudge factor. That lets you go and enjoy your nephew's birthday party where you're going to pig out on ice cream and birthday cake. It's okay. You don't do that every day. You don't even do it once a week. Okay. But you don't want to be a bore. You don't want to ostracize your friends. 80-20 is good enough. If you do the right thing on 80%, 20% is okay. Yes, you can have a Snickers bar once a month, not every day, but you can have a Snickers. You know what I'm saying? Because you're exactly right. The pendulum never hangs in the middle.
Right.
It's always off plumb, always somewhere off plumb. And then we tend to overcorrect, and then we beat up ourselves or we get frustrated. So you got to give yourself a little bit of room to laugh and be, and be a hypocrite once in a while. It's okay. I love bananas. I'm a local, I don't drink coffee, so I don't have that vice, but I do get bananas. I love bananas, so I get bananas. But it's okay to say, I'm going to be inconsistent here. Laugh about it, be fun with it, but then be very serious and intentional about most of it.
Yes, and it's just the day-to-day. And that's why I tell my clients sometimes it's just going meal by meal and not being overly self-critical, because I think the mindset is so important. And when we start having that negative chatter in our minds, we become self-defeating, and it makes it so much more difficult.
I think there is nothing as intoxicating as good food. I'll tell you, when people come here, eat our eggs and sausages, I'm not trying to make a promotion here, but I'm just, I had a lady come in to the store the other day. She had a little 6-year-old son who was very small. He was tiny for 6 years old. She said, he just won't eat. He's a picky eater. He just won't eat. And I said, tell you what, get a couple dozen eggs and try some of those with him. She called me the next week. She said, he's eating 6 eggs a day, and I cannot fill him up with these eggs. Well, his body was craving something. And I think that people don't realize how much difference there is in authentic, well-raised food versus the industry stuff.
How much has your faith affected your advocacy with everything, and I guess your approach to life?
Sure. So yeah, my faith is the bedrock. I don't own this. I mean, the courthouse says we own this land. We don't. God owns it. It's all God's stuff. He owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. I mean, the wealth in every mine. It's all His. And so my obligation, my responsibility, is as a steward of His stuff. Yes. And if you think about your stuff. Let's say you own a car, and you lend it out to a friend. And if it comes back with a bunch of peanut butter smeared around the steering wheel and rips in the seats and a bunch of trash pizza boxes in the back seat, you wouldn't feel very good about what I lent you my car and you trashed it. So I'm thinking, what does God think when He looks down and sees erosion and gullies and rocks where there were forests, and sees a dead zone the size of Rhode Island in the Gulf of Mexico? When He sees the frogs He created can't breed anymore because they're infertile due to pesticide contamination. The eagles He made can't have babies because of pesticide toxic, in their eggs. This is God's stuff, and I'd better be really intentional and serious about presenting more soil, more water, more breathable air, more happy people. That is my responsibility. And I'm honored and delighted to be his hands, His feet in this great healing ministry. And that's exactly the way we see it.
I love it. Thank you. I love that so much. And you're helping so many people and you're educating people about regenerative agriculture. I think you were the first farm I learned about when I started looking into that sort of research. So thank you. It's been a huge blessing. I know that your farm does tours. Where can people even set up going to a tour, and where can people learn more about your farm and more about you?
Sure. So we have a pretty comprehensive website, Polyface Farms. All you have to do is type in POLY and it'll probably come up. It's the farm of many faces, Polyface Farms. Go on the website. There's everything there from, our mission statement to our core values, to how we raise things, to, media things, to tours, to my speaking schedule. If you want to come and hear me, wax out on all these things, and the tours we have gatherings. In fact, we have one coming up next weekend, the 12th and 13th. Is going to be God's Good Table is going to be the inaugural thing. It's basically nutrition for the Christian, for the faith community. Does God care about it? And so that's going to be here the first time. It's not ours. It's that organization.
Okay.
But we host numerous tours, farm tours, lunatic tours. I'm of course the lunatic. We have the Lunatic Learning Center where we host gatherings, and we have organizations come and do things here, and we can feed them, and the food is memorable, unlike a Sheraton, a Hilton, or a Marriott conference center. And so yes, the website polyfacefarms.com. And I've written 15 books, those are available there as well. And you can get plenty of swag and see what the schedule is.
Well, thank you so much. Any last thoughts or, tips that you want to part with the people that are listening and watching?
The only thing that I like to part with sometimes is to just encourage folks that you make a difference. So many times things are so big, from family issues to political issues to global issues, and we just feel like we're insignificant. But the truth is that everything we see today, everything our culture is today, everything your family is today, is a physical manifestation of the culmination of trillions and trillions of decisions that have been made before us and then by us. And tomorrow's physical manifestation of our family, our landscape, our politics, our world, tomorrow's will also be a physical manifestation of the trillions and trillions of decisions that we make between now and whatever date you want to pick that's going to be out there. So you can't control everybody else, but you can control the decisions that you bring to that table. And I just encourage every person to realize that it's that decision made today, tomorrow, the next day by you, that ultimately sways, it bends, it has an effect on where that trajectory is going to go. And you never know who you're going to bump into or who you're going to be the inspiration for. And so please don't think you're insignificant. All of your decisions, your life, work, your energy is significant because it's part of that cumulative decision-making thing that's going to make the world our children will inherit.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time. This has been an honor and a pleasure. Thank you again.
Thank you. It's been great to be with you.
Okay, guys, I hope that this conversation has enlightened you, has given you hope about the way that we're eating and even the way that we are treating our animals as well as our planet. I hope you get the chance to go visit his farm, as I plan to do that in the very near future. If anything, I hope that this conversation shows that it's not about perfection, but it's about eating consistently on most days and not about reaching this unrealistic level of perfection. I hope that this conversation also gives you hope, and it also gives you an understanding why eating animals or eating meat is not a bad thing, but it was actually part of what nature intended. Okay, guys, make sure to eat a lot of meat. Take care of your bodies because it is the only place you have to live. I will talk to you later. Bye, guys.